I'd like to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Acts chapter 22. That's where we're going to be picking up tonight, Acts 22. And we will be picking up about verse 22. So Acts 22:22. If you recall from last time and from our previous classes, Paul has been in the midst of Jerusalem. He's gone back to Jerusalem. He was apprehended by Jews in the temple complex, and then as they were beating him, the Roman garrison came down and took him away so that the commander could figure out what was happening. And that's basically where we've left ourselves. Last week we talked about how Paul asked the commander if he could address the crowd, and he's given permission to do so. And so then he recounts his conversion story there. And then at the very end of that story, he talks about the mission that he was given by Jesus. And that mission was to go and preach to the Gentiles. And at the mention of the Gentiles, the crowd erupts again. And so the commander takes Paul into the barracks, and he is getting ready to question him to see if he can figure out just what is going on and why there's such an uproar surrounding Paul. Now, if you recall where we left off last time, the way that he is going to conduct this interrogation is really what it's going to be, is by tying Paul to a post and flogging him until he can get what he perceives as the correct answers. And remember, flogging is not just a caning. He's not just going to be beat with sticks. This is a scourging. So the same thing that Jesus got at his mock trial, his sham trial, only Jesus, they did actually do it to him with this, with the flagellum, which is basically a series of cords that has bone and rocks and all kinds of things tied into it, and this will tear flesh. It will bring the individual near to death. And so the indication is that Paul is going to be tortured for answers, and that's where we left him. So in Acts 22 verses 22 and following, they listened to him up to this word. This is the crowd. They listened to him up to this word, and then they raised their voices, "Wipe this person off the earth. It's a disgrace for him to live." And as they were yelling and flinging aside their robes and throwing dust into the air, the commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks, directing that he be examined with the scourge so that he could discover the reason they were shouting against him like this. And as they stretched him out for the lash, Paul said to the centurion standing by, "Is it legal for you to scourge a man who is a Roman citizen and is uncondemned?" And when the centurion heard this, he went and reported to the commander, saying, "What are you going to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." So the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes," he said. And the commander replied, "I bought this citizenship for a large amount of money." "I myself was born a citizen," Paul said. Therefore, those who were about to examine him withdrew from him at once. And the commander was too alarmed when he realized Paul was a Roman citizen and he had bound him. Okay, so Roman citizenship, kind of like American citizenship, comes with its perks, if you will, in that we both are subject to the American legal system, but we also benefit from the American legal system as well. Okay, so we have certain rights that are afforded to us as American citizens. Similarly, in the Roman Empire, Roman citizens had certain rights that were afforded to them. Now, I have often referred to Paul as the Holy Spirit's Swiss Army knife because he was everything that the Holy Spirit needed him to be in all of the situations that he found himself in. This is yet another one of those instances where I believe that comes into play. Paul's Roman citizenship is not only going to help him to get out of this particular situation, but it is also going to project him forward throughout the rest of the book, and throughout the rest of the events of the book. And so we continue to see how Paul's credentials, his background, and all of these things come into play. Okay, so as I mentioned, the crowd is in an uproar again. The commander is no closer to figuring out what the answer is because he can't get any straight answers out of the crowd. He hasn't really found anything out from Paul because Paul's saying, hey, I got nothing. I'm innocent. So the tribune's dilemma then, or the commander's dilemma is how to discover the truth and prevent the crowd from rioting. And so, of course, again, he orders Paul's flogging, torture essentially, to discover the truth of the uproar. And then Paul asserts this Roman citizenship, as he, if you recall, he did in Acts chapter 16 in Philippi. The only thing is that he had already been thrown into prison in Philippi. And remember, he said they came to let him loose, or they sent people to let him loose. And he said, no, you need to tell them to come let me loose themselves because I'm a Roman citizen and they need to face the consequences of what they do. Or they at least need to understand the implications. Okay? So Paul reasserts that Roman citizenship, and it prevents capital punishment of a Roman without condemnation. And what's interesting about this exchange that he has with the commander is the commander says, I purchased this citizenship with a large amount of money. Now this was a practice that was instituted by Emperor Claudius, that Roman citizenship could be bought or purchased in some form or fashion. It started as more of an elite practice, and so it would have been a large sum of money, as the commander indicates. And then as time went on, there were certain kind of deals that could be made to lower that cost.
This also demonstrates that this was very rare. As we see, even this commander had to purchase this Roman citizenship.
Right.
And so for a Jew to be a Roman citizen was extremely rare,
Sure.
especially one by birth.
Right, right. And I mean, again, to this guy, Paul is just Joe Schmo Jew. I mean, he doesn't know who he is or anything about him yet. So yeah, it would be particularly interesting for this one guy that they apprehended to also be a Roman citizen or to have been able to purchase that. And so Paul kind of throws a trump card here, right? I mean, he says, I didn't buy the citizenship. I was born a Roman citizen. So in a sense, Paul's citizenship by birth is in some ways more legitimate than the tribune's citizenship by payment. So just kind of an interesting exchange there. Here's the thing, though. He's still got no answers. He has no idea what Paul has done. He has no idea why the crowd is so angry, and he needs to get these answers. So he's racking his brain, just trying to figure out what to do next. So with no additional answers, his next course of action is to send Paul to the Sanhedrin, to the Jewish High Council, which resides there in Jerusalem. Now remember, as we said last week, Paul has not been in front of the Sanhedrin, so far as we can tell, since he was before them 25 years ago getting letters to go into Christian churches and pull those people out and bring them back for questioning. So for Paul to now go back to the same high council that he turned his back on, is how they perceived it, is a big deal. And then all of the activity that's happened with Paul since that time and all the things that are being said about him on top of that, Paul's going to be in the spotlight here. So the commander brings him before the Sanhedrin, and the head of the Sanhedrin, also the high priest at this time, we're going to find out, is Ananias. We're not going to read all of this right now, but just some points to make. Yes? Okay. Okay.
One is, when we studied 1 Corinthians a couple of years ago, and Eddie led that discussion, Paul, a big part of that was Paul
Mhm.
Paul doesn't seem to have many reservations about using his liberty as a Roman citizen. There's an observation
Yep.
that comes to mind, and I don't know if there's any title that we're talking about that comments on that. That's something that kind of occurs.
Sure, sure. So, no, was there more to that? Oh, okay, okay. Well, in terms of Paul using his Roman citizenship, both in the case of Philippi and now here in Jerusalem, Paul had been told that when he goes to Jerusalem, he would be bound, he was going to suffer persecution. Just because Paul may suffer something doesn't necessarily mean he has to suffer something, right? So that's just kind of how I view this, that yes, he could have undergone the scourging and been perfectly innocent as he went through it, but if there's no reason for him to have to endure that and us still get to the same place, then why go through that? So that's what I would come up with for that.
Second part of the question, and this is a little bit of mine. I haven't done a lot of real homework on this or deep study on this, but certainly by the time of the rebellion in the first century of the Jews, they became a thorn in the Roman side, and Judas was something that was not going to be done.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some things I've read that sort of suggest that was a general observation. But I've also read and had discussions with historians, people, history majors, that suggested that one of the things that was of respect or that the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire admired within their religious construct was whether or not a religion adhered to its principles of its forefathers, those ancestral roots, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And Judaism, from that perspective, before all of the rebellion, would have had, even though it was certainly not part of the canon, it would have had a respect from the Romans, from the perspective that this way predates any of these gods that are in our pantheon that really came out of Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was sort of somewhat at least, if not a respect, at least a tolerance for them. I'm just kind of wondering from your studies if you come across like, if that tolerance, if that's what you have heard,
Mm-hmm.
your understanding, or if really that's not true, or if that tolerance sort of wore thin as some of these events unfolded in the first century where they're starting trouble against this other Christians or Christians as
Mm-hmm.
some Romans have asked this night.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the rebellion was in 66 AD, by the time that came on, then they really became Roman.
Sure.
Your thoughts on that?
So in terms of, I think your question mainly has to do with the relationship between the Romans and the Jews, how much tolerance the Romans had for the Jews, basically being a religion that existed at this point for thousands of years. And then did they have any respect for the Jews in and of themselves? And then kind of what's kind of leading to what we're going to know as that Jewish revolt in 68 to 70 AD, yeah. And actually, some of the people that we're about to meet really contribute to answering that question. Now, in terms of Rome itself, first of all, the Jews have a reputation, right? They don't like being under foreign rule. They've already had to deal, whether it's justified or not. I mean, the conditions that they had to deal with under the Syrians and under Antiochus and all the Seleucid Empire, and really being jammed in the middle of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies as they were just bickering back and forth for centuries. And they literally were just in the middle of all of that, just getting pulled back and forth. So yes, they dealt with a lot. But then they began to revolt. They began to have their own, they developed their own kingdom. There was the Maccabean kingdom and the Hasmonean dynasty and all of those things in the period of silence. And then as that went on, they became more and more and more corrupt. The high priest became an office that could be purchased rather than inherited from generation to generation, so on and so forth. It became very political. Yes, it did. Yes.
Judaism, in my mind, has become very similar to Roman religion.
Yes.
It is ritualistic.
Yes, absolutely. And so, of course, then different factions and groups develop within Judaism as well. And so, we can't think of the Jews kind of using that as a monolith. Because there's different, we have Pharisees, we have Sadducees, we have Essenes, we have the Zealots, we have all of these different groups and factions. And especially with a group like the Zealots. We might think of the Zealots as just being a group that was a thorn in the side of Rome, and certainly they were. But quite honestly, the Zealots were just about as much a thorn in the side of the Jews as they were Rome to some degree. Because they brought down the attention of Rome when they acted, right? And so as the Zealots kind of did more and more things trying to revolt against Rome, and certainly we're in a time period now, 15 to 20 years prior to that great revolt happening, where all of these things are going to start to boil and come to a head before finally then, the destruction of Jerusalem happens because of all of that. And again, one of the figures, Felix in particular, is going to play a large role in that. So in terms of Rome having a respect for the Jews, I think the short answer to that is, as much as the Jews would just exist and do their thing, Rome had a great respect for them. But as they just wanted to live their own lives and they, endured the Roman oppression, and quite honestly, Judea and Palestine and Galilee, to some degree, also became this place where if Rome had somebody that they wanted to give an honor to and just kind of give an office, they were like, yeah, just go on down there to Judea. Yeah, just go on over there. Again, Felix is one of those. And so we're not necessarily getting a lot of the top brass down in Judea. And so we get these corrupt leaders. You got the Jews who are getting agitated. You have the leaders who continue to agitate the Jews. And so it just became this boiling pot and until it finally boils over. I don't know if that answers the question, but...
It seems like to me, from what my understanding, a lot of some of this, Josephus and other
Yeah.
writers, that coming out of the back of being revolt and so forth, that they almost looked to the Romans. As the Roman Republic was run, they were looking to the Romans
Yep.
as help.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to help us get out of this, as you were talking about, this tug of war. And they sort of did.
Yeah.
Once the Republic gained control over
Yep.
that territory, but then it ended up being sort of a source of,
Yeah.
as you said, they no longer wanted, they resented being under that,
Right.
that control there in that land.
Well, it's very much an enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? I mean, but then the enemies and the friends shift. And so, it just becomes this maneuvering and intrigue. It's a fascinating history, but it's a long one. Yes?
And I would just add one more name that I think is very important. Because what the Romans valued more than anything else was money.
Mm-hmm.
And Herod the Great's father, I think Titular was his name,
Mm-hmm.
he contributed an enormous amount of money to Rome to purchase the leadership for his son to become king
Right.
of the Jews. And I think you mentioned that you showed even the sign that was on the temple that forbid
Mhm.
anyone who was a Gentile to go through that. That was the work of Herod the Great.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely him. And that's the reason why the Romans would allow that to be enforced.
Sure.
Was because of the money that had purchased that goodwill.
Right.
After Herod dies, the kingdom is divided up, the money is divided up,
Mm-hmm.
and less of it is coming to Rome.
Yep.
And so I think over that period of time, as the agitation money decreases, Roman tolerance of Judaism also is decreasing during that time.
As is Roman tolerance of the Herods as well. As the Herod dynasty goes on, well, dynasty such as it is. We've already talked about Herod Agrippa I, who was the one that executed James, and then we're going to be dealing with Herod Agrippa II here momentarily. They are waning in power. Rome has tolerated them up to this point. They have made deals to kind of keep the peace and just kind of go along to get along and do all of these things. But the Roman influence in this area is going to be growing as the prefects and the procurators and the governors kind of grow in power. And then when the Jews do revolt, they just smash the whole thing with a hammer. Rome. Yeah.
It was a snowball.
It was, yes.
In many ways, it was Jew on Jew crime.
Yes. Uh-huh.
That really
Yep.
set things off.
Yep.
And the ones that had the respect of law were going to the Roman governor, and the
Yep.
the governor saying, "You need to arrest these people. You need to do something." And they, instead of doing something, it became more like the mafia,
Mhm.
and they were taken back into bribes, and over time, it became more overt to where now they're just literally participating in it, and at a point it boiled over, and then the revolts just became overt. And
Yep.
when you openly start killing legionaries,
Yes. Yeah.
you are in trouble.
Yeah, but the Jews also did themselves no favors. Let's put that in there as well. And again, we're going to see some of this stuff, especially in Acts chapter 24, how some of this plays in, the games of intrigue that they like to play with the Roman Empire. And they are playing with fire.
And the genesis of my question, I don't want to labor this anymore, the
Yep.
genesis of my question is kind of building from some of the things that are happening, interacting with Christianity, Christianity as we go along. Is that kind of the way that you see it as well?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because we know that Rome saw Christianity as a sect of Judaism. So in their minds, there's a connection there. So that's going to play into all that as well.
One that they absolutely would not have respected.
Right.
Because they felt
Yep.
that these have completely left
Yep.
what the ancestral heritage of their roots. So we have no respect for what their
Yeah.
Christianity in no way, shape, or form conform with anything that the
Yep.
Romans would have respect for from the religious perspective.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, but again, I will say, as bad as Rome can be, the Jews are doing themselves no favors. And I will just underline that. And Ananias, as we're about to see, is an indicative of that type of thing. So does that help? Okay. Yeah, so as we just mentioned, kind of through that, the high priest really became, especially in the years leading up to Jesus, within the Hasmonean dynasty, which is the 100-year kingdom of the Jews that happened shortly before Jesus was born. The high priest became an office to be bought, not to be passed down through the lineage of Aaron. And so as offices and power come, so does corruption and greed and all of those types of things. Okay? So we meet then in our narrative, as Paul is brought to the Sanhedrin, we meet the high priest Ananias. Ananias was the high priest from 47 to 59. He was appointed by the brother of Herod Agrippa I. So again, tie-ins to the Herods there. As with most of the high priesthood and the leadership in the Sanhedrin, he was a Sadducee. And what do we know about the Sadducees in terms of what they believe, or maybe what they don't believe? Okay, they don't believe in a resurrection, or what else? spirit beings or angels or anything like that, okay? And some have debated whether or not, because obviously there's the Old Testament, and they only hold to the first 5 books, and there's plenty of spiritual influence there in the first 5 books, as well as angels. So some have posited that the Sadducees may have believed, it may not be that they didn't believe in angels or spirits, it may have been that they didn't believe in interaction from angels and spirits. So neither here nor there. Either way, Sadducees are more of the elite Jews. They are more of more along the lines of those Jews that are going to be friendlier to Rome, not necessarily friendly, but friendlier, because their interest is political. They love politics. The Pharisees are more concerned with keeping the strict letter of the law with religion and tradition and those types of things. So Ananias is a Sadducee, and he is a Sadducee that is particularly known for his violence, his arrogance, and his greed. So case in point, he was sent to Rome in 52 AD for possibly instigating violence against Samaritans, and then he has to be acquitted with help from Herod Agrippa II. Okay? He most certainly did contribute to violence against the Samaritans, if not ordering it himself. And so, again, that event was so bad, he had to be called to Rome for it. And then another instance of his greed is that one of the ways that he increased his own personal wealth was by misappropriating, parentheses, stealing, tithe money that was meant for the ordinary priests. So as people would come and they would pay the temple tax and they would give their offerings, the priesthood that was serving in the temple and in Jerusalem was supposed to get some of that money so they could just live. I mean, that was their income. And so he was skimming off the top of that income to increase his own personal wealth. He eventually runs afoul of Herod Agrippa II, and he is deposed. And then eventually, when the Jewish revolt happens and everything leading up to that, he sides with Rome, thinking that he can lift his own personal prospects, and he is killed by the zealots for it. He's assassinated. So Ananias, not a great guy. This is who Paul is brought to in the Sanhedrin. So just looking at the first couple of verses here, chapter 23. Sorry, there's a terrible chapter break here. Verse 1. Paul looked intently at the Sanhedrin and said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience until this day." All right, hold right there. Do you think there are probably some things in Paul's life that keep him up at night? I mean, yeah. I think about a dumb thing I said in 7th grade. I didn't kill people, or I wasn't standing by while others killed people. So what does Paul mean by this statement, I think, is the question we have to ask ourselves.
He was doing what he thought was right at that time.
Yeah.
Every day of his life.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so living in good conscience. We can live according to our conscience, but it doesn't necessarily make us right. And that's the idea there. So when Paul was living that life as a persecutor of Christians, he fully believed in good conscience that he was doing the Lord's will by carrying out the will of the Sanhedrin and the high priest and bringing blasphemers and heretics to justice. Okay? But then, of course, as we saw, he has this encounter with Jesus, and now his conscience has changed because his knowledge has changed. His understanding has changed. And as that changed, and as his heart was oriented now to Jesus and to preaching the gospel, he has not shied back from the mission that Jesus gave him. Jesus said, "I'm going to send you to teach the Gentiles, and I'm going to bring you before people, and you're going to be persecuted." And Paul can honestly say in all good conscience, I have carried out that mission to date and am continuing to carry it out. So Paul can truly say, I believe, I have lived in all good conscience to this day. Now, we know how the Jews feel about Paul. And so the high priest, Ananias, orders that Paul to be struck across the face for deeming to say such a blasphemous, horrible thing. Basically what Paul is saying is, I'm innocent. I'm innocent of anything because I'm doing the Lord's will and have attempted to do that all my life. Okay? Now, we get this kind of curious exchange between Paul and the high priest. Paul, after he's struck, he says, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. And the indication there is he is speaking to either the one who struck him or the one who ordered the striking. That's more likely the scenario there. And so then somebody standing next to Paul says, how dare you speak that way to the high priest? And then we get this really curious statement from Paul where he says, I'm sorry, I did not know that it was the high priest. For the law says, and he's quoting from Exodus there, that you shall not insult the leaders among your community. You shall treat them with respect. Okay? So a couple of questions come to mind then. First of all, does Paul truly not understand that Ananias is the high priest? He's probably wearing garbs and things like that. Not to mention, Paul's not a dummy. I mean, he's been away from Jerusalem for a while, and yes, Ananias is, I think, the 8th high priest since Caiaphas when Jesus was on trial. But Paul's pretty savvy. I mean, he knows things. So does he truly not know that this person is the high priest? I've heard all kinds of theories on this, and I'm not going to, honestly, nobody knows specifically what Paul means by this. There is good conjecture, though, or good possibilities based on what Paul says and how he says it. Now, some have put things out there so much so to say, well, Paul didn't have good eyesight, so he couldn't see the people in the room very well. Okay, whatever, sure. I think that's reaching. What I think Paul means, and again, I'm not the end authority on any of this by any means. I think Paul is saying, you're not acting like the high priest, therefore I don't really recognize you as the high priest. And I think this is a very sarcastic response that Paul gives. And so he is both quoting the law accurately by saying he should not speak ill of the leaders, but also making a point to say, this is our leadership. This is what they are. Paul is unjustly being put on trial for being on a mission that God sent him on. He is being struck contrary to the law, as Paul says, because basically that equates to a judgment or a punishment before the judgment has been given. He's being beaten as the trial is happening, not after the trial is over. And so Paul can also accurately say, it's not right for you to beat me before I've been condemned. And so that's, to me, is really kind of the point of this exchange. I want to move on from this point just real quick so that we can get through this and be ready to pick up next time. Okay? So Paul is sitting before the Sanhedrin. Again, we have this kind of back and forth. And so Paul, again, kind of utters this interesting statement here in verse 6. He says, now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. And this is, again, just like Paul throwing out a firecracker in the midst of this assembly and just kind of standing back to see what happens. Because the Pharisees believe in resurrection, the Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection from the dead, and now, instead of eyes on Paul, they turn eyes on one another, okay? And so it's this, to me, it's just this very interesting exchange because, first of all, Paul is savvy. He is very savvy. He knows what kind of reaction this statement is going to cause. Okay? But what's interesting to me is, A, it works, and B, how does this now become the focus of the conversation? Why was Paul brought on in the midst of the mob to begin with? What was the instigating factor?
He was accused of bringing a Gentile into the temple.
Okay, yeah. So he's accused, first of all, of teaching that they should not follow Judaism and that they shouldn't circumcise their children and follow the law of Moses. And we have these Asian Jews that say that they saw Paul bring in a Gentile into the inner complex of the temple, which is absolutely not the case. So we go from this trial about desecrating the temple, and they're going to stick to that story when they get in front of Felix, by the way. We have this trial about desecrating the temple, and all of a sudden Paul can just throw out, I'm being judged for the resurrection of the dead, and it works. It gets them to bicker against one another, and they argue so much amongst themselves that the Pharisees almost kind of take Paul in as one of their own and say, we can't let the Sadducees punish this guy because he's a Pharisee. He's one of us. And so before anything can happen, the commander steps in and he says, these guys are going to tear him apart just like the guys out in the courtyard. I got to get this out of here and diffuse this situation. So he takes him out and once again takes him into the barracks. Did you have something?
I was just going to say that verse 6 adds a lot of credence to what you just said about verse 5. Because Paul's situational awareness, everywhere he goes.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, and I'll just leave you with this point here. So, again, it's an interesting tactic. It's an interesting pivot, which, again, technically genius. But we have seen the resurrection be the basis for rejection of Paul before, right? We saw it in Athens. We've seen it in other places where Paul has been rejected, talking about a resurrected Savior or just the concept of resurrection. However, it's going to become the main point of Paul's defense before Felix, Festus, Herod, and beyond. Resurrection is going to be the main point. And so ultimately, how I kind of look at this, the entire discussion is going to come back to the resurrection because it is the undeniable proof of Jesus' authority. And all of this comes back to authority. If Jesus is who he says he is, then Paul is validated. If he was not resurrected, if he was a liar or a lunatic, then Paul is certainly guilty. Ted, did you have something?
Yeah, it's away from your main point of the whole.
Okay.
So I don't want to do that. But I also noticed in your notes you have it highlighted or signified as lived in law, good conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And my question would be, what does that matter? And if we accept it significant, what does that say about many people today? Not the leaders of some of these other religions that are deceiving, ignoring, but the layman, the person in the pew,
Mm-hmm.
who is living with a very clean conscience, 100% believe they are doing what God instructs them, what their pastor or preacher tells them.
Mm-hmm.
We would say it's still wrong, you're not doing right. But it's very important, not just interesting, it's very important that we reckon doing wrong with a good conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make it any different? And if it does, that's a big deal.
Sure. Sure. And as you said, this is going to be a much larger discussion than we could get into right now. I will say two things just to kind of to wrap this statement up, and we can certainly continue it next time if we need to. The first thing that I'll say is this statement in and of itself, in the context that we're in, is related to the context we're in, right? And so Paul is making a statement that A, I'm innocent of anything that you have brought against me, and B, the larger assertion that Paul was telling people to abandon Judaism, a Jewish way of life, and not circumcise children and do all those other things. Paul can say, even if I don't hold to the old law as a means of salvation, as we've already covered many times, I can live in good conscience and say that I have not told people not to follow a way of life that their conscience continues to drive them to undergo. And by that I mean the Jewish way of life, not the old law in and of itself. I'm not saying that very well, but I hope you understand what I mean. I have become all things to all men. Yes, for sure. But to your larger point, yes, we can be acting in good conscience to ourselves and still be wrong in the eyes of God. I mean, Paul himself is persona non grata of that. I mean, we could even look at somebody like Apollos, who had a very good heart and again was teaching accurately the way of Christ, but still had more to learn and further steps to take. And so, those are things I think that we need to consider as time goes on. But certainly, we also don't have a free pass just because our conscience allows us to, which I don't think is your point. But, we kind of have to look at those two extremes. Yeah, for sure. Right. Yeah. Mike.
You were talking about the context of the situation.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And I'd just like to add that he's not making this argument to God about his salvation.
Right.
Or his
Right.
sinlessness or degree or something.
Right.
So it's in this situation.
Yeah. Okay.
The situation is also a contrast.
It is yes.
I've lived with a clear conscience all my life.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't mean I was always right all my life.
Yeah. Sure.
I had to keep one
Right.
certain point in growth and Damascus.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's going to be a much larger discussion. I mean, Romans 14, among other places, talking about the place of conscience and how we live our lives and what we can do versus what we should do and those types of things. So it's a good question, and we can pick that up next time if you want to. Thank you all for the good commentary. We're going to let them come in now.